I want to welcome you to this conversation about the relationship between books and architecture, a relationship which, even in the midst of really profound changes to the media landscape and technology and human attention spans, is, as I think you'll hear this evening, really paramount and essential. My name is John Gendall. I'm a co-founder of Chapter, an agency here in New York that works with architects and landscape architects on communications and editorial initiatives, including books and monographs. I'm also really honored to serve as the co-chair of the Communications and Marketing Committee here at the AIANY New York, which convened this conversation. We, as a committee, are a group of marketing specialists and business developers, writers, editors, photographers, web designers, and folks in that conversation. And in different ways, we look to position architecture in the public discourse. So if any of that carries appeal to any of you, I welcome you to join the committee meetings. So we meet on the second Thursday of every month here at the center. And as a committee, we're planning a series of programs about different facets of communications and marketing. And we're so happy to launch it here tonight with this conversation about books and architecture and what goes into the making of books and monographs. We wanted to start it here because books are so foundational to the understanding of architecture and to the advancement of architectural thought. And I must admit, too, part of it is selfish. I front-loading it, this conversation about books. I've always loved books, and my own kind of entry point into a career in architecture was through exploration of architecture in print. And as a committee, we're mindful of the fact that book and monograph making can be a bit of a mystery. Questions abound. How do you develop proposals? How do you staff appropriately? How long will it take? What kind of resources should you allocate to it? Who should be on the team, and when should they be engaged? So to help make that process feel a little less of a mystery, it's a tremendous honor to have these very distinguished editors and publishers with us here tonight to talk about their expertise in making architectural books. So to your left, Holly LaDue is the publisher of Monacelli, a Fiden global company, a position she has held since 2023. At Monacelli, she oversees the publication of about 40 books per year across categories including art, architecture, interior design, landscapes, and gardens. Prior to that, LaDue is the editorial director of Princeton Architectural Press. Upcoming books she's publishing include Tom Kundig, Complete Houses, a book featuring 462 of Kundig's residential projects, New York 2020, a landmark in architectural publishing and a comprehensive overview of architecture in New York City for the past 25 years, and the 30th anniversary edition of Rem Koolhaas and Bruce Mau's SML XL. And then in the middle, Julie Cirelli is the director of Park Books in Switzerland. The Park Books catalog includes several recent titles by architects in the AIA New York community, including Weissman Freddy's Drifting Symmetries, Buildings for People and Plants by Work AC, and The Art of Architectural Grafting by Jeannie Gang. Previously, Julie was the editorial director of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where she oversaw the 2020 relaunch of Harvard Design Magazine and the launch of the Design Now podcast. Her writing on art and architecture has been published in a variety of outlets, including Frieze, Artforum, Form, and Icon magazines. Prior to Park, she authored and edited numerous books on architecture and design. Julie has worked as an editor at Fiden Press and Form magazine for Nordic architecture and design. She holds a master's degree from Columbia University in New York and has received multiple fellowships and grants for her research on the social and political aspects of architecture and design. She is currently based in Stockholm, Sweden, so it's a pleasure to have her here with us tonight. And then Leopoldo Villardi is the managing editor of Architectural Record, where he oversees the magazine's book reviews, residential features, including the annual issue of Record Houses, which is just out, and the Design Vanguard Award Program, which is given to 10 leading young practices each year. Leo joined Record in 2022. After a decade of work as an editor, writer, and researcher, he has contributed to several architecture books, co-authored Robert A.M. Stern's autobiography, Between Memory and Invention, which was published by Monacelli, and is a New York State Council on the Arts grant recipient. Trained as an architect, Leo holds a master's degree from Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, and a Bachelor of Architecture from RPI's School of Architecture. So I will hand it over to them, and then they'll open it up for questions at the end.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here at the center. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, people who have published monographs in the past, but also people who I know are maybe thinking about publishing monographs. So hopefully we can offer a little bit for everyone here. It's also wonderful to be with Julie and Holly, especially considering that, Park and Monacelli consistently put out good books, high quality books every year, every season. So to start, why don't we talk about the differences between Monacelli and Park, because there are a lot of different types and flavors of architecture books out there, but I think Monacelli and Park are very different publishing houses.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, we have a sort of, as architects like to think in scales here, a small, lean, Swiss, very disciplinary publishing house and a giant in the publishing world. Park Books, we do about 40 to 60 titles a year, but nonetheless with a sort of lean and, I would say, responsive approach to the discipline. And we are a very small team and very engaged with every book we do in an extremely hands-on way. We do architecture books and related fields, but we really do them for the architecture community.
Yeah, and let's see, Monacelli, some of you may know, was founded in 1994 by Gianfranco Monacelli. And a year later, he published the famous or infamous SML XL, and we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of that this fall, coming out with a 30th anniversary edition of it, which we're excited about. But we, the core DNA of Monacelli was architecture and design books. And in the latest chapter, so I've been publisher there for 2 years, I'm trying to really maintain that DNA as much as possible, but the publishing industry has changed, and so much has changed. So we've evolved quite a bit, but we publish 40 titles a year, 20 titles a season. And out of those 40 a year, maybe 5 or 6 are architecture books. And of that breakdown, about half of those might be monographs and half might be more like a survey of sorts. And otherwise, John mentioned this in the intro, we publish in the categories of art and contemporary art, gardens, landscapes, interior design, and a little bit of photography. So yeah, that's a little bit about Monacelli. Oh, I will just add, Monacelli was acquired by Fiden Press in 2020. And so these past 5 years, there's been a real evolution of the list, I think, in folding it into the Fiden brand, but still maintaining an editorial identity.
We brought prompts for everyone. Feel free to flip through them afterward. One of the things that you mentioned, Holly, is the change in the landscape out there. Certainly digital media has changed the way we think about print magazines, about books, but I don't think any of us up here would say that print is dead by any means. But what is the value of a monograph or other architecture books today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say the main value of producing a monograph is to assemble your work within a sort of conceptual framework, find an interesting thread that connects some or most of your projects, and create a frame for them. It's a way of producing an architectural identity that has no equivalent in the digital sphere. And I think, the role of the monograph in terms of what it does for our practice really depends on at what point in that practice the monograph is coming. An earlier mid-career monograph is going to serve a completely different purpose than a late career monograph. And depending on where you are in your practice, there are different sort of ways of approaching a monograph to make it make sense for you and your needs. But I do think, in order for a monograph to be successful, it really is a curatorial project, and it is a exercise in really focusing and narrowing what you're doing. And the internet is really the opposite of that. It's just really flooding the zone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends, too, on what a firm or a design practice wants to get out of a monograph. That's usually where I start the conversation, is with the why of the whole thing. But there's something so invaluable about it. I mean, Julie touched on this. I mean, we're a tactile community in the architecture and design world, and there's nothing that really has replaced that yet. I mean, obviously, ebooks and audiobooks are so huge for certain kinds of books. So that's not true yet for this kind of illustrated publication. And I don't really see that happening soon. I mean, I don't know. But I think that collaboration that you were talking about, that you get with your editor and publisher, it becomes a discussion and a dialogue in the process of editing and putting together that book, that is going to be different than any other kind of project you put together about your work. And therefore, it takes real time and a lot of listening and a lot of conversations. And I think, and like I said, I think knowing what is the value for you as authors or an architecture firm, what you want to get out of it, it certainly becomes a kind of calling card and a beautiful example of your work. And I think it's a chance to develop your editorial point of view. Like, how do you want to frame your work? Who do you want to get to write for your publication? And what do you hope they might say about your practice? There's so much that goes into it, that ultimately it's a real celebration of the work that you do.
I want to add something to what you're saying, which is, I think those of you out there who have done a monograph already about your work will understand how the exercise of doing a monograph really holds a mirror up to your practice and reveals any sort of weaknesses in your approach, your partnerships, your values, and your projections for the future. Because it's a moment, a long moment, because making these books takes years and years, but it's a moment in which you pause and evaluate yourself and what you've built, what you haven't built, what you've been trying to do, what you have done, what's been successful, what's been unsuccessful, not yet successful, and where you want to go with this. So I think, I have experienced monographs that have taken 5, 10, 15 years to make, because you hit these roadblocks with what you're really trying to do. And I don't think there's anything else that comes anywhere near this exercise in terms of really, forcing you to understand what you're doing as an architect.
If you're thinking of putting together a book in a year, it's probably not going to happen. We're here to talk about a lot of different types of books, primarily monographs, which have a more or less basic formula. There are several built projects, each represented through photography, drawings, some kind of description. Maybe the founder or the principals will have some sort of introduction or foreword. You might invite a guest critic to share his or her thoughts on the practice. And that can make for a very boring book. But we still have very interesting monographs that come out every year. And so I'm curious for you both, for Park and for Monacelli, where are the pressure points? What are the things that you look to actually change in that formula to make a monograph interesting beyond just the work that's in the book itself?
Well, I think for me, it's not important to change that formula. And I will often joke with authors or architects who come in and I meet with them. Every single person says they want to do something totally different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Invent a new way of
reinvent the wheel, totally new way to do
book.
the architecture book. Every person, you may be to
a man, yeah, absolutely, and woman.
There's only so many ways in traditional publishing that you can make a book. I mean, I had a meeting last year and we ended up having to say to somebody, you do want a book, right? Because we were talking about objects and we actually had to say, like, just to clarify, is it a book? So that formula, I think the most interesting thing to me is the work and is your work and the quality of the work. And this might sound surprising, I don't know, but it's less important to me the thing about, we don't have to reinvent the form to do that. I still think there are interesting ways to do it so that it's not formulaic and not every book is the same. But I think there is a reason why you might invite a couple outside people to talk about your work and you are going to show all your beautiful projects. And you can decide whether those are arranged thematically or chronologically or by type or scale or, but I don't know. I think, some of the examples of the books up here that I have, this beautiful book we published this year with Elizabeth Roberts or this new Tom Kundig book, these are such different books, and you might look at these and say, oh, these do kind of reinvent the form. There are these inserts on this really beautiful, these small inserts in here with writing from a fiction author who wrote about Elizabeth's work, and in Tom's book we have multiple paper stocks, and they're drawing portfolios on the different paper stocks, and there are original interviews with Tom by Young No, and those are on a different paper stock. So there are things like that you can do, but I don't know. For me, it just really always comes back to the work and just to how is the work going to shine, and that doesn't have to be fancy or incredibly different.
I think we're gonna diverge a little bit here because, one thing that we really enjoy doing at Park Books is subverting the form of a monograph. It's kind of like what we enjoy most. And I usually start with like a little canned lecture walking through the form of the traditional monograph and even looking at some monographs together just so that we can sort of establish some ground rules and then figure out how to experiment with the materiality of the book and really kind of stretch and bend the form of the monograph to get something more singular. And that takes a lot of participation of the publication designer. Participation is the wrong word. Really, the publication designer becomes a partner and an author in this process. There's two weird monographs right in front of me. I think these are some examples. Okay, here's a monograph. This is a single building monograph. And it's written like a mystery novel. It's got images and drawings. But it's spooky, it's catchy, it's a beach read.
I took it to the beach, actually, and someone walked up to me and said, "What are you reading?" And I had to explain what it was. So could imagine how that
When was the
conversation.
last time that happened with a project monograph? This is Jeannie Gang's book. This is also a monograph, but it's broken into chapters on the history of horticulture, grafting, really using the metaphor of grafting to unite a variety of projects under a singular theme and idea. It's really well written. It's been a very successful project for Park Books, and the size and shape of these two monographs, I think, signals a lot about the moment that we're in. As Holly said, the landscape for architecture publishing has changed a lot, and conditions for practicing architecture are changing, and the world that we're living in is changing. And, I think when things feel precarious or uncertain politically, environmentally, socially, books also change and respond. And right now I'm seeing a lot of rejection of, bigger, glossier titles for financial reasons. And I think maybe we're going to talk a little bit about the financial realities of these kinds of projects a little bit later, but also because it feels right now that in our moment, people want to be a little quicker, a little bit more responsive, a little bit more humble in the materiality. They want to do smaller books. They want to get them out more quickly, and they want to give themselves the opportunity to keep publishing. So when you do a smaller book with fewer projects or one project, you're able to move to the next project more quickly. Whereas if you do a bigger monograph, this is a career monograph. You do one or two of these in your career.
Yeah, I mean, certainly this complete houses. It has 462 of Tom's houses. He's not retired yet, but I think he thinks of this as his last houses book. Yeah.
Yeah, the end of concluding a period in your career will produce a completely different
But
book
it is so interesting to look at our books here and have, you hold these up, and then I'm very proud, so I'm not embarrassed, but I'm like looking at the mammoth size of some of our books. And I also agree with what you're saying about the ability to be nimble, and maybe it's a lower price point. So it's just, we've kind of been enjoying talking about the differences of our, some audiences, but our publishers and publishing houses and the kinds of books that we're acquiring, because I think we tend towards the more higher price point, bigger, take a couple of years to put together, and maybe a celebration of a longer period of somebody's work. Yeah.
And it seems to me that you have a more savvy sensibility when it comes to opening up these kinds of ideas to a broader audience. I think that we sort of have the luxury of speaking to the already initiated.
Well, you mentioned your audience is the architecture community, and I think that's so interesting because I think our audience is the architecture community and also not the architecture community. And
I could totally give one of those as a gift to someone that wasn't an architect and they'd love it, whereas this would be a little bit of an oddity.
Right.
It's a mystery, but it's hard to explain.
I do want to talk about money at some point in the near future. However, all books start with an idea. Someone is coming to you pitching a book, or maybe you or someone on your team, an editor, has been scouting and in touch with architects and things like that. Can you talk about the process from start to finish? What does that look like at each of your publishing houses for the folks who have not yet embarked on publishing a book?
Gosh, this can go so many different ways. I mean, it's kind of like all stages. These projects come in at all stages, and I don't really have a preference. A lot of people will completely do their book completely. They're working with their designer, they're independent, they're doing their thing, and then they shop for a publisher at the end of the process. And that's just kind of a pass-fail for the publisher. It either fits with our list and we can do it, or we can't. At that point, we have no way of, shaping the project to fit our list. So, it works or it doesn't. We're also approached all the time by people who, my dean says I need to make a book and gave me $20,000. What should I do? And it's like, oh gosh, we're really in the beginning. And everything in between. The ideal is you have an idea, it's a good one, you have a table of contents, you have an idea of who you want to work with, you have a designer that you trust, and you have a rapport, it's someone that's worked with us before, we know that they're reliable, amazing, and genius. You have, ideas for text, you have all of your drawings ready and done, your built projects are photographed, but it's very rare for something to come in so sort of clean and malleable.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think if I were to have a preference, would be like the kind of middle ground where you're organized, you have a sense of what you want your book to accomplish for you. You have great organized photography of your projects is so important. I mean, unless it's going to be a cool book like that. But, But that you're open to the conversation and the collaboration, because that's kind of the fun part with your editor or publisher, is really getting to put your heads together to create something even better. And you're utilizing both parties' expertise and add into that the designer as well. So I like being able to shape, but it's nice when there's been maybe a little bit of groundwork done and some ideas, but just that open dialogue is really great.
What's an ideal amount of groundwork? Like one or two projects?
What do you mean one or two projects? Like the
maybe one or two descriptions,
I see.
A take or a stab at presentation, how drawings will be formatted, things like that.
Yeah, those things. I mean, it could be an idea or two about a writer, an idea about how you might like it to be organized. I always tell people a great place to start as an exercise is think about a table of contents.
Think about a table of contents.
Oh, you do too? Yeah. That's what I always say.
Think about a table of contents.
Think about a table of contents, because it's just an easy way to start organizing and shaping the book in your mind. If you opened up this book, how might you want it to be organized? What are the main themes? What would the chapters be? Things like that.
Yeah, and bring it into the world of the book, because often, architects will come and they'll have a real spatial idea of the object that they want to produce, and a lot of metaphors happen. And the exercise of table of contents is like, no, this is gonna have to be a book.
Bring it back to the book.
Yeah.
Like I said, having your archives and photography organized is great. And then some people will come in with a really nice PDF that they had somebody help them put together. Like, I don't know, somebody kind of in the business who's done it before and maybe they've been consulted to do that, or a graphic designer. That can be helpful to just help visualize the book, even if you're going to completely change the design. Those are some
You don't
things.
have to do that, though. I mean,
No.
you don't have to.
No.
Like, if that's a barrier to entry, just call your publisher and get some tasks on the agenda. It's so hard to make a book in parallel to an architectural practice. It's just, if you don't have the resources of having, a dedicated person on your staff that can always keep this going and keep this on the team, if you're just trying to do it yourself, it's so hard. And if making a beautiful prospectus is what's holding you back from doing your book, then just send the email, call, and we can meet you where you are. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea, whether we can visualize it.
But I do think that point is so important, to know that you will need at least one dedicated person on your team who's going to be the point person to work on this book. And it's often an extra job on top of somebody's already regular full-time job, and maybe they're, in communications in your firm or something. But
Marketing person, or your student assistant, or your intern. It can be anyone. It just has to be somebody.
It does have to be somebody, and I think there needs to be a real understanding among the team that it's going to really require a lot of time and effort on their part for 1 to 2 years, or whatever the time frame is for making it.
Well, that might be a good segue.
I see a lot of people giggling at these things. I feel like when we open this up later, people are going to be like, yeah, man, when I did my book, it took 15 years. Like I can just see in people's faces, like they're like, oh God, yeah, I should have had an intern working on that the whole time.
Well, I do want to talk about money, and that ties to staff time. And I think, we have on the tables here, a Ramsey book by Bob Stern, a Studio Gang book. I know Jeannie has a dedicated person in her office who works on writing projects. Bob has a couple of people who work on those projects. And so it is, something as menial as updating 20 years or so of drawings to all be the same format takes time and has to happen for a book. But I also, how do you set expectations with and surrounding costs with architects? Like, what should first-time publishers expect kind of upfront? What are the costs? Am I paying for editing? Am I paying for graphic design, PR, all of those sorts of things?
I mean, at Park Books, we generally expect, and most commercial publishers on our scale generally expect the architect to come in with funding for all aspects of the book, plus pay us for our services. It's eye-wateringly expensive. It is a huge investment, and it is largely this. Monographs are kind of different because monographs are an important sort of economic and promotional tool for the firm. Other kinds of books are generally supported by subventions, institutional subventions, either from universities or other institutions. We partner on fundraising. We will support your grant application. I always have ideas, depending on the book, for private funding channels. We talk about money right away because, even if you did a book 10 years ago, production costs, meaning printing, paper, binding, and shipping, have literally doubled since the pandemic. So, it's a massive investment right now. And typically, one of the first things we talk about once we've established, the aim of the book and the sort of scale and the materiality and some ideas about that is to really put figures to it. How much text, how many images, how many projects, and I'll make an estimate for each line item: proofreading, copy editing, lithography, pre-press, paper printing, binding, your designer, shipping the book, marketing, distribution costs, every single one. And then we can sit and we can go through each line by line and talk about what are the levers for getting these numbers down, where do I anticipate things might go up, what to be prepared for. And that transparency needs to happen before the project ever even leaves the drawing board, because if you get to the point where you have your whole book and you can't afford to print it, that's a tragedy in the publishing world.
We think about it similarly and differently. I think the main thing at Monacelli is almost always you will be responsible for deliverables that include the images, the high-res TIFFs, so the photography, the drawings, as well as the text. That might sound obvious, but those are the main two deliverables that our authors are responsible for. And then generally, we are responsible for everything else, including design, editorial management, production, printing, shipping, distribution, global sales, and the amazing publicity and marketing that comes with publishing at Phaidon and Monacelli. I think that's one of our real our strong suits, I would say, is that we really build custom marketing and publicity campaigns around book launches. So you will be responsible for bearing the cost, which is not a small cost, for the photography and for that writing, which might include some of your own writing in-house, but also if it's commissioning an essay or two, likely you will be responsible for compensating those writers as opposed to the publisher. And then aside from that, it really depends. And my starting point is, how successful do I think the book will be in the trade? Meaning not the copies that you will take as a buyback for your office, But do I think I can sell 5,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 copies of this? Is going to really affect my whole budget. I mean, I'm really just getting into the weeds now of the back end of this, how this works. But I kind of go from there in terms of building a budget. And if something has a smaller trade potential, then we will be asking for some more financial help to support the making of the book. If something I think has a lot of trade potential, we're not required to ask for as much financial support because I know it'll do really well. We'll sell a lot of copies in the trade, but there's a real range.
Yeah. And at Park Books, we have a profit sharing model. So, depending on how many books we print, we in the sort of financial planning is your royalties. Park Books ends up with about 20% on the net sales price, and you take 10%. So we're sort of in it together on the sales revenue. As a publishing house, we no longer rely on sales revenue because the sales of architecture books are just really unreliable right now. And this goes up and down very quickly. Sometimes things sell really well. Art of Architectural Grip, all three of these sort of top books have sold extraordinarily well. And those architects have received some return on their investment financially.
Yeah, I don't know if this is interesting to people here, but I was thinking about this before coming here this evening and doing this panel so Julie and I know each other from 20 years ago when we were youngish editors at Phaidon together is where we met. And I was brought on to work on architecture books back then. I think you were mostly working on art books.
Working on art books.
And we became friends way back when. And back then, so 2005, 2006, 2007, so I was working on, I think the first book I worked on at Phaidon was Le Corbusier Le Grand, the giant Corbusier book. And back then, so this is before the financial crisis in 2008, the print runs of architecture books were still massive, at least for a company like Phaidon. And the financial crisis changed all of that from 2008 to 2009. It also obviously really affected the architecture industry and the construction industry. And it never recovered in a way. It's never gone back to my early years when you could print several thousand copies of an architecture book and kind of easily expect to sell it in the trade. It's just evolved, and I think we're trying to keep evolving with it. And so, yeah, I think there are different ways to do that. And I kind of love seeing what Park is doing compared to what we're doing. I think one thing we have found is something that seems to be something architecture firms seem more interested in that also seems to work well for books and what people are interested in is this combination of architecture and interiors. I think Elizabeth Roberts is a beautiful example of that, where she's an architecture and kind of finally, she talks about this in the book, embraced also doing design and interior design. And so it can be great in a book to be able to focus on that because it is still a reflection of what her practice is doing. And at the same time, maybe it sells more copies because it broadens the audience more.
But for the folks who maybe don't know the actual money involved, we're talking 5-6 figures usually, I would suspect. Ish.
6
Yes.
figures, definitely.
Giuseppe, do you mean like all in for like when you say that? Because I'm not even sure how to answer that because so you mean like for photography, for everything?
Yeah, I don't even think about the photography and the cost of redrawing things. And in our world, contributors are all kind of scratching each other's backs rather than strictly getting paid all the time, unless we're working with like a specific author. But, the least expensive book is probably going to start at $20,000 just for the things that I listed earlier. And that would be something small like this. For a monograph, that's 50, 60, 70. I mean, you could spend anything. You could spend, and you want to spend $150,000, and you can easily spend money by accident, and that's where your publisher comes in. This is my, bad cop protecting role. It's like, if we are putting as paper stock changes at irregular intervals rather than in signatures, if we're doing anything that involves handwork on the part of the printer, we could easily accidentally spend an extra $40,000. It's like you are constantly trying to figure out the best use of money in these kinds of projects, and being disciplined.
Well, that's where a good partnership comes in, right? In your role as a publisher, director, and editor, you're really helping guide that process. We have an amazing production director who likes to work really closely as well with the designer and the author. Yeah,
and that's an argument for not doing your whole book and then going to find your publisher.
absolutely.
Because, depending on who you're working with, you may have a really interesting material concept for your book that, is out of budget, just completely out of budget, because it's very, very easy to spend money at the printing house, primarily. Yeah.
So very expensive.
Expensive.
But I will point out, and I'm not going to say which architect said this to me. However, he would say, despite the costs associated with putting together a monograph, the afterlife that the monograph has as a gift to clients, as a way to sell the firm, if he were to get just one new project out of that book, it pays for itself. So that was his logic. I do want to talk a little bit about the thinking about books as designed objects themselves. We have a lot of different examples on the table. Is a book very soft and pliant? Does it have a jacket? Is it a very heavy tome, which has a weight and a shipping cost associated with it? How do each of you think about the design of the object, the materiality, the tactile experience for readers as a way to reinforce the thesis of the book, and how much falls into your laps and how much is on the author?
I mean, this is something that I totally entrust to our designers. We don't have any in-house designers. We work with all of the major publication designers across the world, and there isn't an unlimited supply. We work with the same publication designers over and over, and I or someone on my team and the architect and author will work together to come up with a table of contents. And then once we have a sort of enough material for the designer to take and really work with, we bring someone in, and I'll put forward maybe 5 or 6 names based on who I'm really loving working with at the time, and let the architect choose. Sometimes they have a designer that they want to work with already, and it's always interesting to work with new people. I have 2 criteria for working with new designers. They have to understand, and this is super important, if you take one thing away from tonight, it's this: make sure that whoever you're working with understands how line drawings print in offset printing, because that's an expertise that not everyone has. And, the way that line drawings reproduce in an inkjet printer in your office has no bearing on how it's going to print in offset, and you can easily end up with disaster on your hands. So, are they experienced with line drawings and offset printing, and then are they generally flexible and nice to work with? And those are the only 2 things that matter. You may bring anyone you want in,
Yeah, I feel like this is my answer to every question tonight, but I'm like, it's a conversation, it's a collaboration. So I might come into it with an idea, and then always the architects are going to have an idea, and then we come to something together about it. I mean, there's so many factors that influence it. Like, what do I think the retail price of the book should be? What do you think, if you even have a thought about what you think the retail price should be? Because that will dictate a lot. Like, can you have a slipcase, which is this little box that Tom's book comes in? Do you want real cloth on the cover? Because then the retail price is going to go up for that. So everything kind of influences everything. But like Julie, we also work with a lot of different designers, and I don't know. It's just it's a different process, and some architects come in like really knowing what they might want and like, and others less so. But it's just part of that overall, I think, collaboration of putting that book together.
Great, thank you. I want to make sure that there is time for audience questions, so maybe we'll take a few over here. Do we have a microphone? Yes.
Sorry, I came a little late, but just I hired you to write a monograph for my firm. It's less than a decade old. And recently the struggle discovered was backing into a vision that you want to communicate versus the self-discovery process of analyzing what are the similarities, others, what's important. So is that a kumbaya self-discovery? Was out with this, let's get it done. It's really, and that's the Arnold works at back into Emerson's scope versus your own draw.
Well,
Real to me.
we go what you're describing is a very common sort of place to be in when you're doing your first monograph. And my recommendation is to just plan your second book after this, because you're putting way too much pressure on the first book. And if you have 100 projects to choose from, that's way too many. Do something more curated and figure out what your approach to publishing as a practice is going to be for your firm. Create other book ideas for your future where you can place some of your favorite, projects that don't fit in this one. Because if you want your book to end up being, just narrowing down hundreds of projects, it's just too much. It's too much pressure.
And if your firm is only 10 years old, I think that is great advice. You can assume that you have more than one book in you. And I would think about like highlighting 20 projects or something
At max, absolutely.
and don't think it'll be your last opportunity. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Speaking of what you guys are talking about, editing and refinement, Tom Kundig is 462 houses. Was that his idea, or was that a battle? I mean, how did that play out inside Monacelli?
It was no, because that was the kind of precise idea for the book. It wasn't like, let's do a book about houses. He's done books about houses before. So the entire concept for the book was complete houses, almost like a catalog raisonné. But the compromise, which he was completely open to, is, speaking of like saying 20 projects, there are 38 featured projects. So we chose 38 houses to really show on multiple pages, and the rest of the houses are shown at a much smaller scale, all at the back of the book.
Hi, I've always been really curious how you triangulate a book between the factors of print run, price, and what the quality of the book is, because there seems to be a lot of different models for that, where like you have academic publishers who might do a not so pretty book that they are listing at a very high price because they think libraries are only going to buy it, and then something like Tom Kundig might be at the other end of that spectrum or something. I'm not sure. So how do you make that calculus?
Well, I can only really speak as a trade publisher, and how do I make that calculus? It's sort of a constant part of my job as a publisher. I mean, yeah, you kind of nailed it. It is this triangulation. I mean, we know what our sales force will expect one of these books to cost. And sometimes, I have to check with them, like, I think this should be $79.95. Does that seem right to you? I had to raise the price of Tom's book. Originally, it was going to be maybe a $75 book, and we increased it to $100 because we did end up increasing some of the specs, putting a slipcase on it. The book ended up being 100 pages more than we thought it would be, which really increases your print costs. So for us, for Monacelli, I mean, it's kind of an easy process for me now. If I know what roughly the size of the book is going to be, who I think the audience is going to be, how much I know it's going to cost to make this book. I mean, mostly we're trying to get it to be what is the cheapest we can put this retail price for.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's like, what is the lowest possible where I'm not going to lose money on this?
Same.
Hello. Thank you so much for this conversation. I have a question about rather than audiences, which is pretty obvious. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on a question of like asking your clients, what do you want people to do with these books? Do you want them to read? Do you want them to learn? Do you want them to be a case study? Are they students that are gonna, I wonder if there's a conversations about that and that set of questioning to architects to ask themselves rather than, I want to get new clients, which is, valid, but I don't know how many clients you get from these books, which is also another question. Thank you.
I mean, absolutely, that's one of the sort of foundational questions. And it's not just, who is the audience for the book and what they're going to get out of it, but also like, what is the life of this book going to be in general? So often people don't even read the books that they buy. They want to own them. They want to circulate with them. And the book itself just becomes this kind of like totem. It's a platform for lecturing, for exhibitions, for teaching. A conversation that's important to have is, and relates to your question as well, is, how geared towards students is this book going to be? Because if we want students to be able to buy and use this, then we need to set the book's price point more strategically lower. And students are the ones that are actually reading these things. Often for that reason, and especially with a monograph, monographs aren't read in the way that, I think people will read this, I think they'll read this, but when it comes to a monograph, often you're looking at the project, you're flipping back and forth, you're doing a visual reading, maybe you're interested in one thing and not the other things. It's not like a sit down in bed and read cover to cover type of experience. So as you're thinking about your book, thinking about embedding these sort of multiple layers of reading onto them, and this is a conversation that we have with the publication designer as well. It's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is, like I was saying before, we're trying to think about audiences and always how to expand the audience so that maybe it's not just for architecture nerds like us and architecture book people. Like, how do you break it out into the trade, but still have it be an architecture book where there are drawings in there and not just necessarily beautiful photos and, yeah.
Maybe one more in the back.
Well, does some of that early stage?
What's sort of the minimum threshold if you have an idea for a book to have a competitive proposal, like, I guess, for words and speculation in addition to monographs? So like in my case, I have an idea for a book and I was told that I'd need to have a tenure track academic position in order to have a competitive proposal. But more broadly, like, what are the range of ways that you can put yourself on the map, and how much do you need to put yourself on the map if you have an idea in a market and want to do it?
Well, it really depends. Is your proposal a monograph about a firm or what I would call more like a survey type book?
More survey type.
Then it totally depends. I think when you were first asking the question, I thought maybe you were saying for a monograph, and then I would say, oh, you need at least 20 to 30 projects or something. No, so that just depends on what kind of publisher you're looking for. We absolutely don't have the criteria that you need to have a tenure track position to publish a book, but we're not an academic publisher. So it sounds like maybe you've been talking to academic publishers. So there are a lot of other criteria, like what is your platform? Are you known for writing about these things? Do you have a great idea? How are you going to fund this idea? There's other things, but I don't know.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Holly is saying. And academic publishers, they are not thinking the same way we are, and the things that we have been discussing tonight that's not the purview of the academic press. They come with a completely different agenda and criteria and things that they're trying to achieve. And also, I feel like we've known each other for 20 years and we kind of have a lot of things in common, but each publisher does things differently, and if you get a no from a publisher, that doesn't mean your book proposal isn't valuable. It means that it isn't what they do. And it doesn't mean that, okay, I have to change or contort my vision or my proposal in order to fit this thing. It means you need to find a publisher that is interested in what you're doing.
I'm looking to John for a cue. So I think we'll call it there, but we'll float around if you have questions. John, I want to thank you for the invite. Holly, Julie, thank you.
Yeah.
And of course the center.